Philosophical Society presents N. Sri Ram in a talk entitled Waking, Dreaming and Sleep.
Now this morning I propose to speak on the different states of consciousness, and three distinct states have been spoken of and written about. They are all familiar to us: waking, dreaming and deep sleep, that is to say, sleep without dreaming. So when I say sleep, it doesn't mean sleep plus dreaming, but sleep without dreaming. These are experienced by every individual. They correspond in a certain way to daytime, twilight and night. Of course, waking corresponds to daytime because there is the fullness of light, and night of course is dark, and that corresponds to the oblivion of sleep, and in between is the twilight, which is a kind of partial light fading away, and they constitute a complete cycle. The cycle is 24 hours. Now, every cycle of changes, this is by the way, stops and starts again, repeating its course. That is the very nature of a cycle. For instance, being born, the gathering of experience, and dying, going out of this condition in which we are, they constitute a similar cycle. And a cyclic process is always a process within a certain enclosure. If you want to have a diagram in your mind, you can think of an ovoid or a circle. Unless there is a circle, something which is limited, there cannot be a cycle of changes. A certain wave is set in motion. It starts from the center, proceeds towards the circumference, which is the limit to which it can travel, and then from that limit it turns back and comes back to the center. So that state which existed originally when the wave started is again repeated. So you see, unless there is a barrier, some layer of resistance which turns back the action, the motion, there cannot be a cycle. So whenever there is a cycle of changes, there is always a certain boundary within which and because of which the cycle takes place. I am saying this because the enclosure in this case, the alternations of states of consciousness, is the limitations of the individuality. The individuality which is yourself, which is myself, which is everybody else. Everything individual is limited and defined. It may be a vase, it may be a flower, it may be a tree, stone, man, anything. Something which you may call individual, which you cannot confuse with the rest, is always has to have a definition. That is to say, it's a limited thing. Now, the cycle of waking, sleep and waking again, you will leave out the dreaming, is experienced by the individual consciousness. Your consciousness, my consciousness, not by consciousness in itself. There is no cycle in that consciousness in itself, but it is the individualized consciousness which is each human being. It is within this individualized consciousness becomes an entity. you think you are an entity. You are really a body of consciousness. When I say body, I do not mean a body like the physical body with eyes, ears and organs, not necessarily. I use the word body in the sense in which you would say a body of knowledge. That is to say a quantum, a quantity of knowledge, a volume of knowledge. So each human being, when you very carefully examine his nature, go into his nature, is not really this physical body which is put off and put on like a coat, which is like a skin, but it is the contents of which are within the form. That is to say, he is a body of consciousness, an ovoid of consciousness. And all changes that take place in the human career from the birth up to the point of death, or in the long series of lives which constitute the career, all take place within this ovoid of consciousness, within this enclosure. It's an enclosed consciousness. Whatever change takes place there seems to go on, seems to be retained. And if you want to have something additional, it has to be brought into that particular ovoid. I think it is very important to realize this. If you can realize this, you will be able to find out many things for yourself. What kind of changes take place, how it affects the consciousness, what kind of response you give, how it is modified, what death means. All that will become clear to you if you have grasped the fact that you are really this body of consciousness. I am using the word body in the sense which I have already explained. It doesn't mean with a nose and eyes and all that, but just a certain volume of consciousness. Now, it is this consciousness which is limited, which is defined, which is individual, which experiences the state of waking, or rather which is in a state of waking or a state of sleep or dream. When we are not awake, we are not conscious at all. But I needn't labor that point. It is self-evident. So the essence of waking lies in being conscious. Your eyes may be open, but if you are not conscious, you are not awake. You seem to be awake. You put up the appearance of being awake. There is the semblance of awakeness, but you are not really awake unless you are conscious. So the essence of waking consists in being conscious, in contact with the object, whatever the object may be. That means being aware. I explained yesterday what being aware means. Aware of what exists. And nothing more than that. Awareness just means that. Responding. Of course, when you are conscious of something, you respond, either mechanically or intelligently. It means being open, not closed. If you are closed, you are out of contact. It means being in touch with the actuality of things, the things which exist, of which you are aware. All this constitutes the essence of awakeness, which I prefer to waking. Waking, you go to sleep, you open your eyes, you wake. But I am talking of the condition of the consciousness. And with reference to that condition, awakeness, like consciousness, seems a much more appropriate word. Now, since the word consciousness literally means being conscious, It is a noun formed from an adjective. To be conscious is a certain condition, and that condition is referred to when you use the word consciousness. But when you think of your consciousness and my consciousness, or what we call by those terms, then it is very much like an entity. It is a separate thing from others. And in its essential nature, it is the capacity to be awake. It may be awake, it may not be awake, it may be asleep, but still it is consciousness. When it is asleep, it is not conscious. Why do you call it consciousness? Because there is the capacity to be awake, and that capacity can come into action at any moment. I hope it is clear. This is spoken of, the fact that consciousness and the awakeness are essentially one and the same, is spoken of in certain Indian books as spirit waking. Spirit waking. Consciousness in its universal aspect and spirit are one and the same. There is no distinction to be made between spirit and consciousness, not individualized but universal, consciousness in itself. If you say consciousness, I understand, but spirit, I don't know what it is. Well, there is no such thing. And if you think it is something, it's merely a projection from your mind. And this projection takes place from your ideas, from your propensities. You are already built up in a certain way, and that condition causes the projection, and you call it, this is my idea. So the ideas which we form are all really projections. They are formations in the field of consciousness, and whatever is formed is due to certain forces, and these forces operate in a particular field, and the formation takes place out of a certain substance or material which exists in that field. I am merely explaining what I said a little while, just a little before. That is, you project your ideas according to what is already in you. There are certain ideas in you, there are certain memories, you have had certain experiences, you have been built up in a certain way, you have reacted to these things. All these exist in the field of your consciousness, and these forces throw up a certain form, and what is thrown up is really the projection, it is really the thought, it is really the idea. The spirit is always awake when it is in manifestation. When it is not in manifestation, it is nowhere. It disappears. It is like the geometrical point which has no dimensions, and therefore you cannot see it at all. That is the state of non-manifestation. All this to me is of extreme interest, because it concerns our own nature, what you are, what I am. And if you find that it is not interesting because you don't know yourself, within the limitations of individuality, that is, how I am built up, how I am constituted, yourself and so on, the consciousness present, it can be awake, it can be asleep. There are these two possibilities. It can come up to the surface, it can sink down. It can go forward, give attention to something, or it can retire. It can cease contact with anything. There is that much of will in the individualized consciousness. It is obvious. I can give attention to something or cut off the attention. There is always that choice. There is that much of will operating in me. You can focus attention on a particular thing, or you need not focus attention at all, or you may not. or you may be merely conscious of the whole. In that case, the consciousness is like a mirror, as I said, in which whatever is present before it, in all its detail, is reflected, provided it is a good enough mirror. I said it is a mirror. But if it is a mirror which is not made of the proper substance, which contains in it all kinds of material, which causes opaqueness, or if it is covered with dust, then of course it will not reflect. And that is the condition of yourself and myself. It is not the perfect mirror, but it is something like a mirror. You know, a piece of tin which lies on the road. Well, even that piece of tin reflects something. And your consciousness and my consciousness is just like that. But for courtesy's sake, we might call it a mirror. You know how in Voice of the Silence it is said, the mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. The mere reflection will not produce the dust. What gathers dust is the reaction to what is perceived. It is that which clouds the mind, which makes the mind dull, opaque, complicated, which makes so many things happen to it. Now, let us come to the condition of sleep. Sleep is a condition of non-contact. You are not in contact and therefore you are asleep. The essence of it is this non-contactness. It's a condition in which the consciousness exists in itself, within itself. Or you may say it is in a state of absoluteness in which it is not related to other things. Or you might say there was a certain energy which was active and present, and that energy has gone back into the point from which it arose, the center. And that point HPB refers to by the term laya point. It's a Sanskrit term I inflict on you, but it is full of meaning. Laya, L-A-Y-A. The laya point means there is an energy which springs from a certain point. It's a point of concentration, and from there it comes out, it plays, it is active, then somehow it goes back into the point, or if you like, into the hole from which it emerged. If you think of this energy like a serpent, then of course the serpent can come out, spread out its spool, it can make play with its body, but afterwards it can retire into the hole from which it emerged. That is only a simile, of course. And this word laya is very similar to pralaya. In fact, the two words are connected. During what is called pralaya, all the energies of the universe become concentrated at a single point, and that point is like a geometrical point with no dimensions, so nothing is to be seen. And that is the condition which is described in the stanzas of the Zyan with which the secret doctrine opens. That is pralaya. And then at the beginning of another universe, these energies stream forth from that point of origin, which is also the point of their ending. Withdrawal. You may also say it's a condition of rest. Sleep is a condition in which the energy which is consciousness is at rest. It is not moving about. It's in a state of repose. There are different ways of looking at the same thing. What then is dreaming? Dreaming is not real sleep from the standpoint of the consciousness or mind. From the standpoint of the body, yes, because all activities are slowed down during sleep. But then there is this activity going on in your brain, and therefore you cannot call it real sleep. Dreaming is an activity but it takes place in a confused mechanical manner. The mechanical activity of the brain is really dreaming. What takes place during dreaming? The brain or the mind is projecting images, and it's revolving these images. It combines them in various ways. It is active in a sort of blundering manner. That is dreaming. And when you say the images are projected, they are projected from a certain film, as you might project images on a screen. But this film is the film of memory. So many impressions have been recorded in it. And this energy, throwing out its rays through the film of memory or through patches on that film, it produces all these images which you perhaps recollect or which you perhaps forget when you wake up. So it is really the play of impressions already formed. Being awake is action only in the present. I am awake this moment, not awake in the past. I am awake now. It's only in the present. But when you say dreaming, the past in the form of memory is brought into the present. And there are certain forces which operate to bring the past into the present. And that is dreaming. So you see, there is the essential distinction between this waking and dreaming. During dreams, not being awake and not in contact with all the things, so there is no checking of what is projected with the actuality of things. While we are awake, we can also wool gather. We can also dream with eyes open. But then our dreaming will be somewhat coherent, because there is always the comparison with the actuality of things. So you check the images which you form with the things which are around you. In dreaming, there is not that checking, there is not that comparison. Therefore, it is just a play of fancy. Why is there not this comparison? Is there not memory? It is still there. But during dream, there is energy to project, which is mechanical. Projection is ordinarily mechanical. But there is not that superior energy of intelligence. There is a certain energy needed for mechanical action. There is a superior kind of energy which is intelligence. And real intelligence is never mechanical, because at every moment, at every point, it is fully aware. So that action doesn't take place out of mere habit, out of momentum, out of a certain mechanical continuity. So for real sparkling intelligence, which doesn't even fail for one moment, it means there is awareness, full awareness all the time, every moment. A flame must burn every moment. If it burns this moment, next moment it doesn't burn, and then it starts up again, surely that is not a flame. And the intelligence is like a flame. So it is always on the alert. It is always aware. It is conscious of everything of which there is the need to be conscious. Now thinking is also projection, because after all the images come up from the basis of memory, as I explained yesterday. I won't go over it again unless you want to put a question to me. But thinking is projection of images in full daylight, as it were, so that you are conscious of what you are projecting. You can compare it with the things around. You can compare it with your memory. Therefore, there is the awareness of the actuality of things. And that keeps the projection within the bounds of facts and reason. In dreaming, there is no such regulation. You can dream whatever you like. You can dream of a cow with 100 legs if you like. There is nothing to prevent it. But actually, while I am awake, if I think a cow has 100 legs, people will say there is something wrong with your brain. But in thinking, I use the word facts and reason. All the words that I have used convey something, and they are chosen deliberately. I said facts and reason, but there is also room for supposition and assumptions. That also I explained yesterday. Certain facts are distant from one another. You do not see the connection. But you invent a theory, a hypothesis, a term in an equation, a symbol, or a geometrical figure, which to connect these two facts. And that is a supposition, it is assumption. The whole relativity theory is only an assumption. It just explains the connection between one thing and another. But really the bridge which is built between these facts of experience is merely an invention of the mind. There may be some other kind of bridge which another Einstein might produce, and that might explain these phenomena even better. So all hypotheses, all postulates, suppositions are really assumptions, but they seem warranted because they explain. Now, the activity of dreaming has therefore a certain similarity to thinking, because both are projections, both are based on memory, both are positive, not like consciousness, which is essentially negative. Not that. It's an activity which takes place in the field of consciousness. So both are positive. Whereas, as I said yesterday, mere awakeness is negative. But negative in a most beautiful sense. Receptive. Sleep, you might say, of course in sleep, the consciousness is totally off the objects. That is, if you think of a subject, the knower, the object which is known, there has to be contact between the subject and the object, but during sleep the contact is completely gone, so the subject is off. That is, of course, the condition of sleep in its essence. Therefore, since there is no object, there is no response at all. Now I come to other considerations. In our so-called waking state, are we fully awake? Now we are all awake. Are we really fully awake? Our waking is a partial and superficial waking. We are not awake to beauty, for instance. There are so many things which are beautiful in nature, in life, but we miss them. We are not awake to them. Our senses perceive certain things, but they can be trained to perceive so much more. The eye can perceive many shades of color. Beyond the spectrum, on both sides and in between the colors of the spectrum, it can be trained. If you take a person while young and train him to observe, you will find that the capacities of sight can be considerably extended. Similarly of hearing, it will be possible to recognize various tones, various sounds, the quality of a sound and all that. All that should really constitute part of education. It doesn't at present. But even though it may be trained, the senses have only a limited capacity. Their capacity is fixed. Out of the enormous range of possibilities, they cover only a small part. They know a section of what there is to know in the universe. That is all. All your senses, however excellently they may be trained, however perceptive they may be, they cannot transcend their limitations. They can only perceive so much and not more. And what we perceive, I perceive a tree, I perceive the grass, I perceive the dog, I see so many things. We see only in rough outline. We miss all the nuances, the subtleties, the inner content of a form. All that life has to tell us through the innumerable forms which it wears are completely lost upon us. Yesterday you had the sentence, listen to the song of life. I don't know how many people have listened and for what they have snatched out of that song. You see, so little. Life is everywhere. You are all living beings. Each one says something out of his very being, not out of his lips, out of the expression on his face, out of his eyes, out of his whole demeanor, the way in which he sits, the slant of his head. Everything about the person says something. And that is the way life speaks. It speaks out of every tree, every bird, the way the bird flies, how it sits on a branch, how it takes off, every worm. But we miss all that. We don't know. We just know that there is a worm crawling, that is all. We see things in a kind of rough, blurred outline. In other words, there are many areas of consciousness. Yesterday I said consciousness is sensitivity itself. There are many areas of consciousness which are not awakened in us at all. A profound slumber reigns. There are only certain areas which have been lighted up, which are inactive. The awakening that has taken place already, we are all presumably awake, is only at the periphery of the consciousness. We think of the individualized consciousness as an enclosure. We are only awake at the periphery, where the various objects which are outside are beating upon us and calling our attention. You have to be awake in this world, otherwise you will knock your head against a wall. As you approach the wall, you have to know that there is the wall. You have to be sufficiently awake for that purpose. So in the same way, we have to be awake to some extent. When I walk on the ground, I have to look at a pit, otherwise I fall into it. So you see that all the objects which are around us, in some way, they beat upon our consciousness and keep it awake. But we respond, as I said, only from the periphery, the circumference. In other words, from the surface. We respond from the skin, not from the heart. The heart is somewhere inside, we might speak of it. But we don't respond from the heart. We don't respond from the fullness of ourselves, from the core of our being, from the center of what we are, from the wholeness of ourselves. We respond merely superficially. And even that skin is a kind of dull skin. It's largely calloused. It is not delicately sensitive. We might think our skin looks beautiful, but you know, it can be much more sensitive than it is. And because we respond only from the surface of our natures, we respond only to the surface of all the things we perceive, respond only to the forms of things, and the relations between those forms. And not what the form contains, the life within the form, the potential depths within them, all that we miss. In fact, our waking is really a mixture of attention and inattention. You know, it's like writing with various blanks. It's a mixture of response and lack of response. I respond to something, but I will fail to respond to something else. And therefore the two things are mixed up. And that is the kind of waking which what verb shall I use? Enjoy. we enjoy the waking, perhaps we do. But in addition to this partial and superficial waking, there is a good deal of dreaming while we are awake. I do not know whether we are conscious of that. We are projecting from layers of past experience embedded in our memory. All the time there is this projection taking place. And some of it appears as the activity of thought. But while we are awake, but if the projection is mechanical, it is dreaming, it is not real thought. You may call it thought if you like. It is not the creation of intelligence, it is the mechanical action of the memory. So what we call thought may be partly dreaming. So we are partially awake, superficially awake, and this waking includes a good deal of dreaming. And part of this dreaming we call thought. That is the condition in which we are. It's not highly flattering. We don't recognize all this because we don't pay attention to ourselves. We lack self-knowledge. Our attention is not turned inside. We don't perceive what is in our heads, what goes on in our heads. An ambitious man is always dreaming of the future. He is in a state of dream the whole time. He is building a castle, polishing it, ornamenting it, extending it, thinking of himself as seated in that castle and reigning there in state. It may be a vivid dream because he reacts strongly. He likes importance. He likes the show, the magnificence. So when he thinks of himself as being seated in a castle, on a throne, it is a thrilling dream. Therefore it's a vivid dream. But the vividness doesn't make it any the less dreaming. It's only dreaming. And the ambitious man is always disappointed, whether he realizes his ambition or not. If he doesn't realize it, he is disappointed. When he realizes it, he will find it is nothing. It just turns to dust and ashes in the mouth, to use the language of light on the path. So you will find an ambitious man is always in a feverish condition while there is the ambition. He is stretching and straining himself. He may develop ulcers and headaches or not, as the case may be. But anyhow, even when he reaches the goal, he will find that the goal is not what it seemed. It is like the mirage in the desert, glistening, delectable from a distance. But when you come to it, it is merely hot air that rises from the ground. So, the dreaming is really the eruption of the past into the present. My time is nearing now, but I just want to say one thing. I will make it brief. I will skip over certain things which I intended to speak of. There is spoken of in Indian books a fourth state. And that fourth state, it's not explained anywhere. But I think there is the possibility of understanding it. It is a synthesis of all the three states, but each of them transformed. It is waking, it is deep sleep, and it is dreaming in a certain sense. And the waking is full waking, complete awareness, awareness in depth, and that is the nature of consciousness in its purity, in its essence. And it is sleeping in the sense that it is in a state of repose, it's in a condition of rest. Even when it is acting, if there is perfect harmony in the action, it will give you a sense of peace, of repose. You can be as active as you like, but if there is perfect harmony in the movements, in the motion, in the action, then you will experience the peace in the midst of the action. And it's dreaming in another sense, not projecting from layers of impressions already formed, but it is throwing up an image as a soil might throw up a flower. How does it throw up? How does it project when there is no kind of a film through which to project, no impressions to push up, no images already existing to throw up? Then what comes up? It may be the projection of a truth, of which the consciousness, is the pure consciousness, has cognizance. So that the truth which exists inwardly, subjectively, as a kind of feeling, as a kind of sense, is given a certain body so that it comes up. In other words, the truth which is implicit in that consciousness is made explicit. That is also a projection. But you needn't use the word projection. We might say it's a creation. It is really an expression of what is already present in the nature of that pure consciousness, which is like virgin soil, untouched, uncorrupted, untarnished, absolutely pure, homogeneous, in a condition of unity, with an extraordinary harmony present in it. All the laws of harmony are already present in that bed of consciousness, so that what it throws up is really a kind of flower which gives you an illustration of the harmonies already present in it. There can be that kind of dreaming. So it's dreaming, it is the repose, the absolute rest, the absoluteness of deep sleep, which is like perfect oblivion. Every moment you forget what had gone before, at least forget to the extent that you are not influenced by it. So that every moment what takes place is a new creation, something out of a fresh initiative. It's born anew. There is a statement in a beautiful Sanskrit verse which speaks of the spirit, which I said is consciousness in its purity, in its essence. And they say the nature of the spirit is that it is born every moment. It's being born. I won't say the Sanskrit word because it won't mean anything to you. It is in a state of being born the whole time. So there is always that newness, the freshness. What had gone before is gone. Something new, new initiative, a new beginning, new life in all its tenderness, its beauty, its freshness. And that is the nature of the spirit. It's an extraordinary phrase, just one Sanskrit word, being born. So that is the condition, I imagine, would be the condition of a liberated being. That is, there is only one state of consciousness. There is a certain kind of dreaming, this creation. The creation which is like a dream. Waking, the fullness of waking in death. Deep sleep, not the deep sleep of ignorance, but the sleep of repose, the sleep of absoluteness, all simultaneously present in that condition. Extraordinary condition. I think it's wonderful even to think of it, even though we may not realize it. But that, I imagine, is the perfection which is, of course, possible for every human being, because he is a body of consciousness. He can come to that consummation.
The Theosophical Society presents N. Sri Ram in a talk entitled Imagination and Reality.
I am sure you will all agree with me in thinking that this is a fascinating topic to consider. We will very carefully examine what is the process of consciousness which we describe as imagination. It is always best to start with the fundamentals Because when you start from the fundamentals, assuming they are right, that they are rightly conceived, we can take the right direction. Now you think of consciousness in its absoluteness or purity. It is just being conscious, to be aware of the thing in front of you, or around you, or behind you, or within you. That is the pure consciousness. As I have said, it just reflects things. It is absolutely quiet, it stays still, it mirrors whatever is the state, the object, the thing, the idea which is presented to it. Now when it mirrors a certain field, and everything is a field is that which consists of a number of particulars, as it were, which you can examine as if they are spread on the map. That is a field. So when it reflects the particular field or a field of particulars, it automatically notes the relations between the different points or objects there. And it is out of the knowledge of these relationships that reasoning develops. You put the particulars in various positions and you come to see how they are related to one another. So when we reason out something from facts which are noted, you are merely making explicit that which is implicit in the situation. So reasoning, although it may imply a certain motion of the mind, is really the bringing out of what is already there. If you had a perfect perception, the moment you look at things, well, you know all the facts, you know the relations between them. It's finished. There is nothing to reason out. You know it all in a glance. But when you come to what we call thinking, then there is a different action. The consciousness does not merely mirror facts, but in some way it takes hold of these facts and various other facts which are stored up in the memory and builds a certain edifice. Thinking is a process which is highly mixed. There is perception, there is the working out of relationships or reasoning, and there is the constant creation of images, so that you proceed from one image to another. So thinking rises above the ground of facts. The facts are there, they lie still. You know the facts. Merely to know them is observation, is pure awareness. To know them in their relationship amounts to reasoning, amounts to. But when you go beyond this quietness and produce certain things, build up images, edifices, small or large, then you indulge in thinking. And that really is an activity of the imagination. So in thinking, constantly imagination is involved, brought into play. In scientific imagination, what happens is they try to envisage a kind of plan which will take in different facts or phenomena which are seemingly unrelated. So the scientific theory, hypothesis, plan the scientific imagination, it assumes certain hidden relationships. As you see in the development of the wireless, for instance. It was all a theory, but proved by facts, ascertained facts. The facts are seemingly unrelated, but there is a hidden relationship. And the conjecture, the guessing, the imagination of this relationship is what is called scientific imagination. The whole theory about the atom is just imagined. Goodness knows whether the atom is really just as it is said to be. Most probably it is. But if you look deeper, it may be a little different. We do not know. But anyhow, the plan seems to work, and therefore it has a certain validity. It exists in a certain section, and there are various sections to the totality. Now when you produce images, throw them out like so many mushrooms, well, that is an act of projection, projected from the bed of facts or fancies or whatever it may be. So thinking is all the time a projection. You project this, you project that from the ground of facts or so-called facts, which may be fancy. And we all project our thoughts, our images from the established background. We have a certain nature, we have become something, and from that ground, from that situation, we think. So a man's thought is according to his nature. It partakes of the quality or qualities that belong to his nature. A sensual man will always be creating sensual images. A religious man with a religious background concerned with the salvation of his soul or the imagined salvation will go on throwing up images in connection with the soul and the salvation and all that. This background which everyone possesses is really an acquired nature. It is a certain deposit of influences. H.P.B. says the mind is a mirror which reflects. While it reflects, it gathers dust. That's how she puts it, poetically. Now all this dust becomes an accumulation. And there is the accumulation of the ages, one might say. At least the ages of one's life, childhood, boyhood, adulthood, and so on. So this accumulation becomes a deposit. It's a hardened background. It is what we call our nature, mistakenly. And from this background, according to its nature, we just project images. But then, this nature, as I said, is an acquired nature. It is the dust that we have gathered, prejudices, false ideas, all kinds of things that are really alien to our original nature, that pure nature, the soul nature, spiritual nature, which is really the background of everything. And when that original nature projects the pure consciousness, when something is projected from a pure state of awareness, there is a certain energy which rushes up from that ground of awareness as a kind of fountain, flowing water. Fountain is one simile. You can change it into flower. Every time there is the flowering, that is to say, a flower which is a form of truth. You can call it the flowering of truth. It's very interesting. The images we create may be images of ugliness or beauty, just as a person may take a lot of clay and create a number of statuettes, and some of them may be grossly vile, ugly, unbalanced, but some may be beautiful. Similarly, the mental images, our thoughts or thought forms, may be images of illusion, images which represent an illusion. It may be a form of illusion, or it may be a form of truth. And when we say illusion, we must not think of some psychopathic condition which does not belong to us. Every superstition, every false idea is an illusion in its own degree. We are constantly deluding ourselves. We are peopling our own field with images which are, well, HPD would use the term Mayavik, that is to say illusory. It's just a phantom. It's not the form of truth. You know, every imagination, I am using the word as an act of imagination, is a kind of construction. You build up an edifice. It's a structure, it's a thought form, which is shot through with emotion. Because the mind and the astral principle always go together. In the book Thought Forms, you will find that the astral body is a pale copy or a dull copy of the mental, which is to indicate that the mind and the thought and the feelings always work together. They correspond to each other. So when you build an edifice, a form, an image of thought emotion, it can be ugly, it can be beautiful, it can be architecturally right, or it may be thoroughly unbalanced, grotesque, a very peculiar structure. And if it has a certain architectural beauty, the architecture in imagination very often brings in comparison. There is a likeness in nature between one phenomena and another. The two are entirely apart. But then there is a correspondence, a similarity. The mind is struck with the similarity. So in this architecture of thought, these other phenomena are brought in. I may be talking of the subjective consciousness and the play of the intelligence in it. It suggests to me the sky. The play of the intelligence suggests to me lightning. So when I say the subjective thought, I may use the simile of a sky with lightning, spiritual lightning. You see, now, this moment, as I have been saying it, I have built up a form. And in this form, the sky is embodied in some manner, and there is also the lightning. So you see that all kinds of comparisons are brought into the construction. So the construction in the field of thought, which is, as I said, constantly mixed with emotion, is something extraordinary, because you bring in phenomena from every field of your awareness and you produce a form. It may be extraordinarily beautiful, just as some architectural masterpieces are beautiful. If you look at a wonderful cathedral or temple, you see that in a strange way the very material, the walls, the columns, the domes, the arch, the curves, and the proportions, the arches, they all seem in some way to play upon you, produces a certain exquisiteness of feeling which you cannot
really describe. Architecture can be divine, just as music is divine. And in this form, a beautiful form always embodies a feeling. When you say beautiful, you already said that there is feeling. Beauty is connected with feeling. Even if you purely mentally look at something and say it is beautiful, well, it means you import a little tinge of feeling into which that word beautiful conveys. So a beautiful form, it may be the form of a vase, it may be a flower, it may be the sky, it may be the motion of a bird, it may be anything, or it may be geometrical. Well, it always embodies a certain feeling. Each thing in nature has a certain feeling, that is to say, its own special quality. And if you touch that quality inwardly, it sort of, you get a certain feeling about it. That is the pure feeling. The word feeling being used not in the ordinary sense of, various agitated emotions. The other day I made a distinction between feeling in its purity, which is just like touching. When I touch, I know the quality of the thing, its magnetism, if you like to call it, its nature. The specialization of the divine life which is there, that is different from the emotions which are a kind of manufacture, let me say, something manufactured. I don't know whether I am correct. Well, each thing in nature has its own quality, its feeling, its particular note. It sounds a certain note. And this pure feeling, which is embodied in a form, an architectural construction, a musical composition, it belongs to the soul nature of things, S-O-U-L, soul nature, that is to say the spiritual nature. So everything has its soul, and that soul has a certain feeling or just a musical note, if you like to think of it, and the form which it wears expresses that note fully or imperfectly, because the form is evolving. When the form has evolved to its perfection, it will convey that inner quality perfectly. The note will sound out for all to hear. But now we can rarely hear the note. You have to listen very carefully to discern the note. And conversely, this is an interesting fact. The note, the feeling when you have in yourself will produce the form. It will produce the appropriate form. If you have an inner stirring of the soul, that is the feeling, that is the sounding of a certain note within yourself, it will produce the appropriate form. You will conceive something which expresses that feeling. You will conceive an image, a picture, form, something which brings out the quality of that feeling. The note is embodied in a form. You can understand this. Desire stimulates thought, does it not? When you want something, when you feel a little craving inside yourself, you will find that in some way this craving stimulates thought. But if craving can stimulate and produce thought, stimulate the thinking nature and throw it up into various images, so can a pure feeling. But the creations of a pure feeling are real creations, creations of beauty, creations of truth. The form is always appropriate to the note which is sounded within. And this comes out in creation. It is the feeling feeling which gives the sense of reality. The feeling, the note, the effect upon the consciousness. It is that which gives the reality. You can see, for instance, in music. We listen to music yesterday. Music has a certain reality, not the particular sounds which somebody may be able to note and put down on paper. No, not that. But music is something different from the notes. It belongs to the whole. And that music is to the consciousness, it gives a certain sense of reality in color, so to say. You can put it this way: imagination creates the color, but reality is the light that shines through the colors. When the colors are dim, the light is shut out. When the colors are pure, the light shines through. The light, as I said, is the light of reality. Reality lies in an experience of sound, experience of form, experience of color, experience of something brought to our minds. So, reality is always subjective. You have a certain experience, and that experience gives you the sense of reality. Therefore, reality is subjective. What does imagination do? Imagination all the time paints pictures. It sculpts. It composes music. So the nature of the imagination is essentially psychic, but it merges into the spiritual or divine. As I said the other day, the psychic can, by gradations, become so pure and wonderful that it becomes divine. But the activity of the imagination is at various levels. Level of sensuality, level of pure beauty, and even various levels that we normally do not include in our experience. When you think of the life in Devachan, as you find it described in the book, in the Theosophical Manual with that name, the Devachanic life, that is you and me, in the state that is called Devachan. Then we have thrown off the coat of passions in the astral world. When we stand out in our pure spiritual individuality, in that life, what do? It's all imagination. The Devachani, the person who is in Devachan, you and me in a state of Devachan, we are all the time painting pictures. We are imagining. That is, we are projecting various episodes, illustrations, forms. But those forms to us are forms which are more real than the reality of our experience and contact, either at the physical level or at the various astral levels. This is to show that it is the nature of the experience which determines the degree of reality. We are here, it's real enough. We shuffle off this mortal coil. We are in that strange psychic land which is composed of so many regions, which is the astral. It's more real in various ways. And then when you go off to Devachan, having shed this astral nature, then you are having a life which is much more real. The fact is that we project from where we are. Our minds here are very mixed. The projections, that is to say our thought forms, are of a mixed nature. When you become pure and spiritual, which you are inwardly, when you project from that state, you project various forms, but the forms convey to you a certain reality. Your consciousness dwells in those forms and experiences a reality which is superior to the reality that belongs to the grosser, more material realms. Theosophy, in a way, as it is set out in our literature, needs imagination, because we speak of so many superphysical states, including nirvana, but it requires a pure imagination, and the pure imagination comes only from pure living, and without that living the imagination cannot be pure, and without the imagination being pure, you cannot imagine the realities of the higher planes. So you see that to know the wisdom, you have to begin with purity in your life, in your heart, in your mind, and so on. You cannot detach the two. It's not like reading a book. Somebody explains. There is the lexicon, lot of commentaries. You come to know it. You are wise. No, that doesn't take place. It's an entirely different thing. Imagination works through association. Our mind always, you look at something, a little fabric. The fabric is connected with the factory. It's connected with various processes in the factory, with the material which is used. And then there is the association of the dress into which the fabric can be cut. And then the person who can wear the dress, the kind of life that he lives, the molecular texture, the color. And this color brings to your mind some other color somewhere, and so on and so on. So from every object there are various stepping stones, as it were, in different directions. And our imagination is led along a particular series of stepping stones. Is that not so? We go on thinking from one thing to another, this, next, that, and presently you don't know where you started from. So we see we move along a line of associations. But it is really a field of associations in which you find your own line. And how does this line, how is it formed? Mainly by the fact that the imagination likes to proceed along that line. It is gratifying. It takes the line of least resistance. It's just led on from one pleasant thing to another. It's a kind of daydreaming. You move from one image to another image in such a way that you are all the time led along a path of pleasantness. But when you have purged yourself of this love of gratification, which is really spirituality, it's a difficult thing, then how is the imagination led? It is there at a point, there is a whole field of association. This love of gratification leads my thought or imagination along a particular track, but there is no gratification, nobody to lead, you are just there. Where do you proceed? Well, then it proceeds along a track of its own. So, in other words, the imagination becomes just pure awareness, which is simple and therefore monadic in its nature. It may not be the monad as used in theosophical literature, but it is a thread dropped from the monad, the thread of consciousness, which comes down through all levels, and there is that thread in each one, which is simple. It is just pure awareness. Therefore, you may call it monadic. Now, from that monadic thread or pure awareness which exists at every level, thank God, the truth can be projected. I said all thought, all imagination is projection. Well, we can't say projection with a certain feeling of contempt and dismiss projection as valueless. You can project truth. But then is it really projection? Or is it an inward realization? I think that it is the projection of what is, what exists in essence as a kind of feeling. I am unable to use any other word, there is none, into a form which is creation. Project from the pure background, the original nature, which is unstained, uncorrupted, without any desire for this or that. From that pure background, you project. What is it that projects? A certain note arises in that pure background. It's a delicate feeling, pure. And that feeling embodies itself in a form that rises from that background. And that form you may call projection, but it is the projection of truth. What is absolutely within, in the inmost part of oneself. The word part is not nice, but still I use it. Has been said to be absolute beauty and absolute truth. There is also goodness. But when we say absolute, we must not think of it as abstract. It is not abstract. It is something which is full of life and color and love and all that. This monadic ray which is dropped into the lower levels from the loftiest point brings with it a touch of the truth that is present there at the lofty levels. And that is why when you understand something which is true down here, it is really a reminiscence of what you had known inwardly, all unconsciously up there. You meet with truth, absolute beauty, something pure. It has a delicate scent. And you have the feeling that you had known the scent somewhere. It was at the source. That is the pure spirit. You know how it has been said that the soul reality is in the subjective, but it is not in a kind of subjective condition which has been formed through various reactions, but a condition, a state which exists in itself, the state of the pure subject, which has not been affected by the object, by anything outside itself. It stands there absolutely pure and uncontaminated, serene. That is the pure spirit. Of course, spirit is really an abstraction when it is separated from matter. All manifestation is dual, spirit matter. If you strike off matter, spirit disappears. The spirit is one with the absolute. But spirit as separate from matter comes into existence in manifestation, which is dual, always, and even at the highest level, spirit matter. Therefore, this spirit undergoes a veiling. And it is said that it has 7 veils over it. That is what Brother Raja says in his book. So we cannot know the absolute, but we can know the spirit in one of its manifestations. Not the spirit at the loftiest point. To know that, you have to have an absolute absolutely unconditioned nature. You have to drop all the veils. But we cannot know the absolute. We only talk of the absolute. Talking about things doesn't mean you know about them. As I said the other day, we talk about nothing or nothingness, but do we really understand? Have you ever pictured or imagined or contacted this nothingness? No, we just talk about it. It's like root of -1, it has its use in mathematics, but it has no concrete reality. So we cannot know the absolute, but we can know a state of absoluteness. That we know. In an experience of beauty, in an experience of love, of pure happiness, we can experience absoluteness. That is to say, it's a condition in which there is no void. It's a condition in which when you are there, you are not thinking of something else. It is not a stepping stone to something else. You just come to a peak there, that's all. And this absoluteness has a certain wholeness. The whole of your nature experiences that condition. So that there is, when you are experiencing it, if you are thinking of something else, then it means it is not absolute, it is partial. Well, nirvana is said to be a condition of absoluteness. But then HPB speaks of the depths of absoluteness. That is an expression which he uses, highly suggestive. You can be in a state of absoluteness. You can be in a state of greater absoluteness. Even when we are enveloped in various ways by shadows of different sorts, sometimes there is a shaft of light. But then as you proceed further and further, the shadows get thinner, but still you are aware that there are these shadows. A person who is trying to remove these veils of illusion or shadows never comes to a state in which he says, now it's finished, because there is always something to be cleared off, some little touch of something which veils the reality. Even according to the Buddhist conception, there are various states in nirvana, not only one state. Various states. They use the term para nirvana. Para means beyond, supreme, great. So there are various states of absoluteness. We really do not know what is the nature of the individual when he is in that state. We do not know. When the Lord Buddha was asked about it, he said it is not being as we know it. They asked him, is it non-being? He said, no, not non-being. So it is a certain state which is indescribable, but it is described as a state of blessedness, of truth. It's fathomless, it is measureless. The nirvana is like an ocean, it is calm, and so on. Various lyrical descriptions, all using imagery that we can understand. You have always to use imagery when you are thinking of that which is beyond the veil of the mind, because there are no words in which even to suggest it, let alone describe it. There are certain things which are indescribable, indefinable, incommunicable. In one of the Mahatma letters, the Master says, it is not that we want to withhold truth. We cannot communicate it to you. And whenever they speak of something that belongs to the spiritual, it was always misunderstood. In one place, one of the Mahatmas says that you are looking at things spiritual with the vision of the material. Don't remember the exact word. Whereas we look at things material with spiritual eyes. Entirely different. But it doesn't matter. The Lord Buddha, even though he knew that the nirvana is indescribable, unimaginable, he said that over and over again. Nevertheless, he spoke of that reality. You find that there is a reference to it. Mr. Krishnamurti declines to speak of that which is beyond. Most of the time he talks of the limitations of the mind. But then he refers to the beyond. He does say that then the timeless, the immeasurable and so on comes into being. He just puts it in one sentence. But that means there is a reference to it. There can be a reference to that condition in our own minds because of this monadic ray, this thread of awareness. When the mind is quiet, you can know something of that which is beyond it. You can know a little bit of its nature. But what is required is really nirvana in the more literal sense. Literally it means blowing out, annihilation. But it is not annihilation of consciousness as it is misunderstood to be by so many people. But it is the personal consciousness, which is different from consciousness in itself. It's the putting out of the fire which is fed by earthly fuel, not the flame which exists by itself without any fuel. And that flame is the pure consciousness. It comes from above. It is spiritual in its essence, in its nature. But our earthly consciousness is a consciousness which is fed by sensation. And that is the earthly fuel. So when this fire is put out, then there is the pure flame. If you are not sure that there will be the pure flame, you find out. So these are various thoughts which I thought I would put before you so that we may discuss it a little bit. It's a very difficult subject, as you see. What do we know about reality? We know something of imagination, but we don't know much about it. We certainly don't know what it is like when it soars into the realm of reality, when it shines in its own pure colors. The beauty that the imagination can reveal we do not know. But we know that it is the bird from heaven that lights on earth. It may be a bird that is confined to the earth, but then it is transformed into that heavenly bird, this swan, that takes flight from where we are into some eternity that we do not know of.